Bartleby, said I, Ginger Nut is away. Just step around to the post office, won't you? It was but a 3 minutes walk, and see if there's anything for me. I would prefer not to. You will not? I prefer not. I staggered to my desk and sat there in a deep study. My blind inveteracy returned. Where was there any other thing in which I could procure myself to be ignominiously repulsed by this lean, penniless wight, my hired clerk? What added thing is there perfectly reasonable that he will be sure to refuse to do? Bartleby! No answer. Bartleby! In a louder voice. No answer. Bartleby! I roared. Like a very ghost, agreeably to the laws of magical invocation. At the third summons, he appeared at the entrance of his hermitage. A hermitage is a place where you hide out. At his hermitage. Go to the next room and tell Nippers to come to me. I prefer not to. He respectfully and slowly said, and mildly disappeared. I love the adjectives. Melville is the master of the adjective. He respectfully and slowly said, those are adverbs, and he mildly disappeared. That might be an adverb also. Very good, Bartleby, said I in a quiet, sort of serenely severe, self-possessed tone. But the concept there of will versus preference, right? If you're trying to lose weight, you prefer to eat the chocolate cake in the fridge. You need willpower not to. Preference is something you just feel. You have a preference for it. It's a bit self-empowering. Will is the exertion of a force. Very different. Another word that comes up is the as a sort of juxtaposition to preference. The narrator is a man of assumptions. He assumes, and rightfully, he assumes that when he asks Bartleby to do something, a man who he pays, that Bartleby will do it. Instead, he gets, I prefer not to. So Bartleby is the eminent person of preferences. Okay, good, Nicole. Now here's an interesting one from Summer. I found it a little confusing at first also, but I looked it up in analysis after the fact, and it really helped. I think the lawyer was friendly to Bartleby until he didn't have any other option and had to be more serious. I think Bartleby's job sorting dead letters may have given him a very grim view of life, and he's just over it. That could be right, Summer. He's over it. But as far as this teaching online business, and you guys maybe want to email me about this, or we can talk about it if we get together. Teaching online literature is interesting because you can look stuff up. I mean, there's a million things about Bartleby the Scrivener and the Great Gatsby and most of the stories I teach. And that just has to be acknowledged. I have to assume students are going to do that. It's not cheating, especially when Summer says, I looked up some analysis. I mean, that's good. If a student only looks up the analysis and doesn't read the story, that's bad. Summer, I know you read the story. So that's bad. So that's kind of one of these things that have been rolling through my head with what I call distance teaching. But anyway, back to Summer's point. The only other job we know that he had was working in the dead letter office. Can you imagine a more depressing place to work? Maybe not today, because people don't write letters like they used to. But in this time period, the late 19th century, people wrote beautiful letters to each other. Beautiful handwriting, pouring out their soul, just catching up. One of the letters that the narrator uses as an example is there would be a wedding ring, mementos would be sent, and the letter goes off and never gets. It hits a wall. It never gets to where it was supposed to go. And that's pretty sad. A message, an interpersonal message that winds up in a dead letter office. And it was Bartleby's job to read one after another to try to get the letter where it was supposed to go, which was very hard. read one after another these messages that never get to the receiver. And Bartleby becomes, whether it's directly connected to that, I don't think we can turn this into a math problem and say because of this, then that. But certainly the dead letter office is held up as an example of who Bartleby is anyway. And his, he's kind of a dead letter. He is a message that no one gets. He doesn't seem to get messages from people. It's a very sad story. Very sad story. Will asked, why was he sent to prison just for squatting, and why did he starve himself to death when he got there? Well, he just refuses to take nourishment from anyone. All the people around him, ginger nut, nippers, that's a drink, turkey, all three of them are named after food or beverage, and yet he can't get any nourishment from them. And why was he sent to prison? Well, as Summer wrote, it was the only place they would have had to put him. This is not an age of homeless shelters. Could have shoved him out on the street. But it is somehow appropriate, though, and symbolically, that Melville does this, because the place he winds up is a prison in Manhattan called the Tombs. And Bartleby goes, at the end, he's in a fetal position at the Tombs, of all places, next to a wall. I'm distracted. I'm doing email while I'm supposed to be teaching class. What is happening here? The furnace just kicked on. We'll be back in a minute. All right, we're back. Yes, I prefer not to. I find myself, after reading this story and teaching it, saying to people, well, I'd prefer not to. He's infectious. And it's the same thing that happens to the staff, the other staff in the office. They start saying, no, I prefer not to. Yes, I've been saying that a lot also. Oh, I never say it myself. I prefer not to. Wait, you just said it. I mean, it's crazy. And frankly, again, I said this earlier, I'll say it again, it's empowering. Do I want to? Do I need to? Do I prefer to? It's kind of empowering, though I do not encourage you to try it too often at your job. What is life? I'm just going to read a couple of the more interesting scenes here. And I have written next to this in my book, Pure Comedic Genius. Say now, you will help to examine papers tomorrow or next day. In short, say now that in a day or two you will begin to be a little reasonable. Say so, Bartleby. At present, I would prefer not to be a little reasonable, was his mildly cadaverous reply. Mildly cadaverous. Just then the folding doors opened and Nippers approached. He seemed suffering from an unusually bad night's rest. Remember, he's only good for half the day. Induced by severe indigestion than common. He overheard those final words of Bartleby. Prefer not to, gritted Nippers. I'd prefer him if I were you, sir, addressing me. I'd prefer him. I'd give him preferences, the stubborn mule. Who is it, sir, pray, that he prefers not to do now? Bartleby moved not a limb. Mr. Nippers, said I'd prefer that you would withdraw for the present. Somehow of late I got into the way of an involuntary using this word, prefer, upon all sorts of not exactly suitable occasions, and I trembled to think that my contact with the Scrivener had already and seriously affected me in a mental way. As Nippers looked very sour and sulky, was departing, Turkey blandly and deferentially approached. With submission, sir, said he. Yesterday I was thinking about Bartleby here, and I think that if he would but prefer to take a quart of good ale every day, it would do much toward mending him and enabling him to assist in examining his papers. So you've got the word too, said I, slightly excited. With submission, what word, sir? Asked Turkey respectfully, crowding himself into the contracted space behind the screen, and by doing so making me jostle the Scrivener. So the three of them are now stuffed into behind Bartleby's little screen here. What word, sir? I would prefer to be left alone here, said Bartleby, as if offended at being mobbed in his privacy. That's the word, Turkey, said I. That's it. Oh, prefer. Oh, yes, queer word. I never use it myself. But, sir, I was saying, if he would but prefer Turkey, you will please withdraw. Oh, certainly, sir, if you would prefer that I should. As he opened the folding door to retire, Nippers at his desk caught a glimpse of me and asked whether I would prefer to have a certain paper copied on blue paper or white. He did not in the least roguishly accent the word prefer. It was plain that it was involuntarily rolled from his tongue. I thought to myself, surely I must get rid of this demented man. This is already an office full of people doing what they prefer or prefer not to do. Again, a good half day's work out of either of the other Scriveners is the best the narrator hopes for. And the narrator starts suggesting that maybe Bartleby can get a clerkship somewhere. Maybe he can be a conversationalist companion to a man traveling overseas, which is kind of a little funny one. At one point, the narrator decides to leave his office. I will change my offices. I will move elsewhere. And he does. He has to move away from Bartleby. Again, let's return to that previous idea about why he's telling us this story. Why he's telling himself the story. He feels guilty about Bartleby and not being able to connect with him. He feels guilty not being able to penetrate the wall of Bartleby. So much so, instead of throwing Bartleby out, he moves his offices. It's only when the people who move into the narrator's old offices start to talk about him and talk about Bartleby that Bartleby has to be removed to the tombs.